Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. The lighthouse that calls. The first time I saw a ship that shouldn't exist, I thought it was a trick of the light. That's what we tell ourselves, isn't it? When something impossible appears, we rationalize it away. But after 3 weeks at Blackrock Lighthouse, I've stopped trying to explain what I see. My name is Daniel Marsh. I took this job because I needed to disappear for a while. The lighthouse service was desperate enough not to ask too many questions about why a former naval officer with a drinking problem wanted to isolate himself on a rock 10 miles from the nearest shore. The previous keeper had left without notice, just walked out one morning after radioing in something unintelligible about ships calling from the dark. The Coast Guard found his boat drifting empty 3 days later. Blackrock sits on a jagged outcropping of stone that's barely visible at high tide. The lighthouse itself is a Victorian relic, 160 feet of weathered granite with a Fresnel lens that dates back to 1879. The technology has been updated, of course. The light is automated now, but someone still needs to maintain the equipment, log the weather, and report any vessels in distress. That's where I come in. 6 months of solitude was exactly what I needed after everything that happened with Sarah and the accident. 6 months to dry out and get my head straight before facing whatever was left of my life. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. I established a routine. Check the equipment at dawn, log the weather at noon, maintain the living quarters in the afternoon, and keep watch during the evening. I'd radio in my daily report at 8 p.m. sharp, then read until sleep came. The Coast Guard supply boat arrived every 2 weeks with provisions and mail. Simple, peaceful, until it wasn't. It was during my 3rd week when I first noticed something odd in the logbook. I was reviewing the previous keeper's entries, a man named Edward Thorne, and noticed that his handwriting had changed dramatically in his final weeks. The neat, measured script had devolved into frantic scrawls with entries that made little sense. April 17, ship sighted at 2:13 a.m., not on any registry, no running lights, signaled with lamp, no response. April 18. Same ship, 2:13 a.m. exactly, signaled again, thought I saw figures on deck. April 19, 2:13 a.m., it's closer tonight, can see the name now, SS Orpheus, checked registry, sank in 1907. April 20. They're watching me from the deck, they know I can see them. The entries continued like this for another week before stopping abruptly. The final entry simply read, "They're calling me to come out, I have to go to them." I closed the logbook and laughed nervously to myself. Clearly, Thorne had lost his mind out here. Isolation does strange things to people. I'd seen it during my naval days, sailors going stir-crazy after months at sea. I decided Thorne had probably suffered some kind of breakdown and abandoned his post. It happened. That night I woke suddenly at 2:12 a.m. The digital clock on my nightstand cast a red glow across my small bedroom. I'm not sure what woke me, perhaps a noise or just the strange internal clock we all possess. I lay there, listening to the wind howling around the lighthouse and the distant crash of waves against the rocks below. Then it was 2:13 a.m. and I felt a strange compulsion to look out the window. The night was clear, with a full moon illuminating the sea, and there, perhaps half a mile from the lighthouse, was a ship. It was an old steamer, the kind you'd see in photographs from the early 1900s, with a single smokestack and a wooden hull. But what struck me was that it wasn't moving. Despite the choppy waters, it remained perfectly still, as if painted onto the horizon. I grabbed my binoculars from beside the bed and focused on the vessel. There were no running lights, no sign of life on deck. But as I watched, I could make out the name painted on the bow, SS Orpheus. My blood ran cold. I dropped the binoculars and backed away from the window. This was impossible. I was seeing things, or perhaps dreaming. I pinched myself hard enough to leave a mark, but the ship remained when I looked again. I grabbed my coat and flashlight and hurried up to the lantern room. From there, I had a 360-degree view of the surrounding waters. The ship was still there, motionless against the waves. I aimed my powerful signal lamp at it and flashed 3 times, the universal signal asking if they needed assistance. No response came, but as I watched through my binoculars again, I saw movement on the deck. Figures, perhaps 3 or 4, moving slowly along the railings. They seemed to be looking in my direction. I radioed the Coast Guard immediately. Blackrock Lighthouse to Coast Guard Station, over. After a moment of static, a sleepy voice responded. Coast Guard receiving, go ahead Blackrock. I have a vessel approximately half a mile southeast of my position. Appears to be in distress or possibly adrift, no running lights, requesting you dispatch a patrol boat to investigate. Roger that Blackrock, can you describe the vessel? I hesitated. What could I say? That I was seeing a ship that sank over a century ago. Appears to be an older vessel, possibly a steamer. No visible registration numbers from my position. No response to signals. Copy that. We'll dispatch a patrol boat at first light. Weather conditions are too rough for night operations in your area. Maintain visual contact if possible and report any changes. Understood. BlackRock out, I kept watch until dawn, but as the first light of morning touched the horizon, the ship was gone. Not sailing away, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. When the Coast Guard patrol boat arrived 3 hours later, they found nothing. No ship, no debris, no sign that anything had been there. "Are you sure about what you saw?" the patrol officer asked me over the radio. "The waters were rough last night, could have been a mirage or reflection." "I know what I saw," I insisted, but even as I said it, I began to doubt myself. Had I been dreaming? Was my mind playing tricks on me after reading Thorne's disturbed entries? The Coast Guard filed a report but found nothing to investigate further. I was left alone with my doubts and the growing fear that perhaps I was following in Thorne's footsteps. That night I decided to stay awake past 2:13 a.m. I sat in the lantern room with a thermos of coffee, binoculars ready, and waited. The night was overcast, with no moon visible through the thick cloud cover. The sea below was a churning black void. 2:13 a.m. came and went. Nothing appeared. I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Perhaps it had been a hallucination after all. I was about to head back down to my quarters when I heard it, a sound cutting through the constant background noise of wind and waves. A ship's bell, ringing slowly through the darkness. I rushed to the windows, scanning the horizon, but saw nothing in the blackness. The bell continued to toll, each ring seeming to come from a different direction, as if the source was circling the lighthouse. Then the radio crackled to life. At first I thought it was the Coast Guard, perhaps following up on my report. But instead of a voice, there came a sound like rushing water, followed by what I can only describe as whispering, multiple voices speaking too quietly to make out words, but with an urgency that made my skin crawl. I switched off the radio and the whispering stopped. When I turned it back on a moment later, there was only static. I didn't sleep that night or the next. I began to dread the approach of 2:13 a.m., yet found myself unable to ignore it. Sometimes the ship would appear, always in the same position, always motionless. Other times there would only be the bell or the whispering on the radio. Once I heard what sounded like footsteps on the metal stairs leading up to the lantern room, though I knew I was alone in the lighthouse. I started keeping my own log. May 5, ship appeared at 2:13 a.m., SS Orpheus, counted 5 figures on deck tonight. They stand perfectly still, facing the lighthouse. May 6, no ship visible. Bell heard from 2:13 to 2:18 a.m. Radio transmitted whispering for approximately 3 minutes. May 7, ship appeared closer tonight, perhaps a quarter-mile out. Figures on deck appeared to be signaling with lamps, but the pattern makes no sense. Not Morse code or any naval signal I recognize. I knew I should report these occurrences, but what would I say? That I was seeing ghost ships? That I was hearing phantom bells and voices? They'd remove me from my post, and the thought of leaving before understanding what was happening had become unthinkable. Instead, I began researching. The lighthouse had a small library of books left by previous keepers, including a volume on local maritime history. There, I found mention of the SS Orpheus. It had indeed sunk in 1907, during a violent storm that claimed the lives of all 37 souls aboard. The ship had been carrying cargo from Liverpool to Boston when it struck the very rocks upon which Blackrock Lighthouse now stood. At the time, the lighthouse had been under construction, its light not yet operational. According to the account, the ship had been spotted by workers on the partially completed lighthouse, but they had no means to signal a warning. They watched helplessly as the Orpheus was dashed against the rocks. The bodies that washed ashore were buried in a small cemetery on the mainland, but one detail in the account made my blood freeze. The Orpheus had struck the rocks at precisely 2:13 a.m. I closed the book and tried to make sense of what was happening. Was I being haunted by the victims of the shipwreck? Were they seeking some kind of justice or peace? Or was there something more sinister at work? That night, as 2:13 approached, I stood in the lantern room with a newfound determination. When the ship appeared, and I knew it would, I would try to communicate. The SS Orpheus materialized exactly on schedule, but tonight it was much closer than before, perhaps only 100 yards from the base of the lighthouse. I could clearly see the figures on deck now, men and women in early 20th century clothing, their faces pale and expressionless. They stood perfectly still, all facing the lighthouse. I aimed my signal lamp and flashed a simple message in Morse code. "Who are you?" For several long moments there was no response. Then slowly the figures on deck raised their arms in unison, pointing toward the lighthouse, toward me. The radio in the corner crackled to life, and this time, instead of whispering, a clear voice spoke. "You see us now, Keeper." As he did, as they all have, my hands trembled as I approached the radio. "Who are you?" I asked aloud. "We are the forgotten, the lost, the betrayed. What do you want from me?" A pause, then, "Join us, Keeper. We are lonely in the deep, so very lonely. I backed away from the radio. I don't understand. Thorne understood. He came to us, as will you in time. The transmission ended with a burst of static. When I looked back to the window, the ship was gone. I spent the next day in a state of agitated research, pulling every book from the Lighthouse library, searching for any information about the Orpheus, about Thorne, about any previous keepers who might have experienced similar phenomena. What I found disturbed me deeply. BlackRock had gone through 6 keepers in the past decade, an unusually high turnover rate for lighthouse positions. 3 had resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons. 1 had been found dead at the base of the lighthouse, apparently having fallen from the gallery. And 2, including Thorne, had simply vanished. In each case, their logs showed a similar pattern of observations leading up to their departure or death, sightings of unregistered vessels, strange sounds, radio anomalies. Always centered around 2:13 a.m. That evening, the Coast Guard supply boat arrived with my bi-weekly provisions. The young officer who delivered them seemed concerned by my appearance. "You all right, Mr. Marsh? You're looking a bit rough." I realized I hadn't shaved in days and probably looked as sleep-deprived as I felt. "Just adjusting to the solitude," I lied. He nodded sympathetically. "It gets to everyone eventually. That's why most keepers only do 6-month rotations." I helped him unload the supplies, then asked casually, "Did you know the previous keeper, Thorne?" The officer's expression darkened. "Not well. Spoke to him a few times during deliveries. Seemed normal enough until near the end." "What happened at the end?" He shrugged. "Started talking crazy. Said the lighthouse was calling ships to the rocks. Said he could hear the drowned crew whispering to him at night." He shook his head. "Coast Guard figured he had some kind of breakdown. It happens out here, alone with your thoughts. And no one ever found him, just his empty boat. The working theory is he fell overboard, maybe deliberately. The currents around here are treacherous. Body probably got swept out to sea." Before he left, I asked one more question. "Have there been any shipwrecks near here recently?" "Or historically?" "Dozens," he replied. "Before the lighthouse was built, these rocks claimed at least 1 ship a year. That's why they built it in the first place." He paused. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about the history," I said. "Gets boring out here." After he left, I felt more isolated than ever. I now understood that whatever was happening to me had happened before, to Thorne and possibly others. The question was, what had they done about it? That night, I decided on a different approach. Instead of waiting in the lantern room, I went down to the small dock at the base of the lighthouse where my boat was moored. If the ship appeared, I would go to it, confront whatever was out there directly. I sat in my boat, engine ready, watching the digital display of my watch tick toward 2:13 a.m. The night was calm, with just enough moonlight to see by. As the time approached, a thick fog began to roll in from nowhere, enveloping the lighthouse and surrounding waters in a blanket of gray. 2:13 a.m. At first, I saw nothing through the fog. Then gradually a shape emerged, not the Orpheus, but a different vessel. This one was older, a wooden sailing ship with tattered sails that hung limp in the still air. As it drew closer, I could make out the name carved into its bow. The Tempest, another lost ship. I wondered how many were there. Before I could start my boat's engine, I noticed something in the water around me. Shapes moving beneath the surface, circling my small vessel. Pale, human-like forms, their features distorted by the water. Hands reached up, breaking the surface, grasping at the edges of my boat. I recoiled in horror, nearly falling overboard. The hands, dozens of them now, began to rock the boat violently. Through the fog, I could see more ships appearing, an entire fleet of vessels from different eras, all converging on the lighthouse. A voice spoke, not from the radio this time, but from the water itself, as if the drowned were speaking in unison. "We were called to the rocks by false lights. Now we call others. It is the way of things. What do you want from me?" I shouted into the fog. "A keeper. We need a keeper to maintain the light, our light." With a sudden jolt of clarity, I understood. The lighthouse had never been built to save ships from the rocks. It had been built to lure them. Or rather, something ancient and hungry that dwelled in these waters had corrupted its purpose. The keepers weren't meant to warn ships away, but to serve as unwitting accomplices in drawing them in. And when a keeper discovered the truth, they either fled, died, or joined. I started the engine and turned back toward the lighthouse dock, but the boat wouldn't move. Looking over the side, I saw pale hands gripping the hull, holding it in place. The water around me began to churn as more figures rose to the surface. Men, women, and children in clothing from across the centuries, their waterlogged flesh pale and bloated, their eyes empty black pools. "Join us, keeper," they intoned. "Maintain the light that calls the ships, or join us in the deep." I grabbed the boat hook and began striking at the hands, but there were too many. For each one I dislodged, 3 more took its place. The boat began to take on water as they pulled it down. In desperation, I dove overboard, swimming frantically toward the lighthouse dock. Cold hands grabbed at my legs and arms, trying to pull me under, but adrenaline gave me strength. I reached the dock and pulled myself up, gasping for breath. The fog had thickened until I could barely see the lighthouse tower. As I staggered toward it, I heard a chorus of voices behind me. "You cannot escape, Keeper. This is your purpose now, call the ships to us." I ran into the lighthouse and barricaded the door, though I knew it wouldn't keep them out for long. Whatever these entities were, they weren't constrained by physical barriers. I had to find another way to end this. The answer came to me as I climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room. The light, it was what they wanted me to maintain, their lure for unsuspecting ships. If I destroyed it, perhaps I could break their hold on this place. I reached the lantern room and approached the massive Fresnel lens. The automated system had the light rotating steadily, sending its beam out across the waters. Through the windows, I could see the phantom ships had drawn closer, surrounding the lighthouse in a circle of ghostly vessels. I found a fire axe mounted on the wall for emergencies and raised it, ready to smash the lens and the light mechanism. But as I swung, I felt an invisible force stop my arms mid-motion. "That is not permitted, Keeper." The voice came from behind me. I turned to see Edward Thorne standing in the doorway of the lantern room. Or rather, what had once been Edward Thorne. His skin was pale and waterlogged, his clothes dripping seawater onto the floor. His eyes were black voids like those of the figures in the water. "You're dead," I whispered. "I serve a new purpose now," he replied, his voice gurgling as if his lungs were still filled with water. "As will you. I won't help you lure ships to their doom." Thorne smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. "We rarely need actual ships anymore, not in this age of radar and GPS, but we still hunger, and there are always fools who venture too close." He gestured to the window. "Like the Coast Guard patrol that will arrive at dawn to check on you." Horror washed over me. The supply officer, he noticed something was wrong. Yes, they always send someone when a keeper starts to learn the truth. It's happened before. "Many times, I won't let you take them." Thorne laughed, a wet, choking sound. "You don't have a choice, Keeper. You will maintain the light, or you will join us in the deep. Those are the only options." I looked at the axe in my hands, then at the lens behind me. I knew what I had to do. "I choose neither," I said, and swung the axe not at the lens, but at the electrical panel that controlled the automated system. Sparks flew as the axe connected. The lighthouse plunged into darkness as the circuit breakers tripped. For a moment there was silence. Then a howling began, not from Thorne, but from outside, from the water and the ships. A collective scream of rage and hunger denied. Thorne lunged at me, his movements unnaturally fast. His cold, wet hands closed around my throat, squeezing with inhuman strength. "You've doomed yourself," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "If the light doesn't call them, we will take you instead." I couldn't breathe, couldn't break his grip. Black spots danced in my vision as consciousness began to fade. With the last of my strength, I brought the axe up one more time and buried it in Thorne's chest. He released me, staggering backward with a look of surprise. But there was no blood, only seawater pouring from the wound. He smiled again. "That won't stop me, Keeper, nothing will." As he moved to attack again, the first light of dawn broke through the windows of the lantern room. The phantom ships outside began to fade, dissolving like mist in the morning sun. Thorne's form similarly began to waver, becoming translucent. He screamed in frustration, a sound that echoed with the voices of countless drowned souls. "We'll be back tonight, Keeper, and every night. You cannot escape us." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the darkened lantern room. I spent the day preparing. I knew they would return at 2:13 a.m., and I knew what I had to do. The Coast Guard patrol boat arrived as Thorne had predicted, responding to the supply officer's concerns. I told them there had been an electrical malfunction, but that I had it under control. They offered to evacuate me until repairs could be made, but I declined. I needed to end this once and for all. After they left, I gathered every flammable material I could find: books, papers, furniture, kerosene from the emergency lamps. I piled it all in the lantern room, around the base of the lens mechanism. Then I waited. As night fell, the fog returned, thicker than before. I could hear the bell ringing across the water and whispering voices carried on the wind. They were gathering their strength for another attempt. At 2:12 a.m., I stood in the lantern room, a lighter in my hand. I had disabled the fire suppression systems and barricaded the door. There would be no stopping what came next. 2:13 a.m., the phantom ships appeared, surrounding the lighthouse in a ring of ghostly vessels. The water at the base of the tower churned with pale bodies rising to the surface. And in the lantern room, the air grew cold as Thorne materialized before me. "Have you reconsidered, Keeper?" he asked. "Will you maintain the light for us?" I smiled. "I'm going to end it." All of it. Before he could react, I flicked the lighter and tossed it onto the pile of accelerants. Flames erupted immediately, engulfing the room in fire that quickly spread to the ancient wooden structures within the lighthouse. Thorne screamed, not in pain but in rage. "This changes nothing. We will still be here. We will find another Keeper. Maybe, I said, feeling the heat intensify around me. But I won't be the one to help you. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the lantern room and beginning to work its way down the tower. Thorn and the other apparitions faded as the flames grew, driven back by the purifying fire. I had one escape route, a maintenance door that led to the gallery outside. I staggered through it as the roof of the lantern room began to collapse, emerging onto the narrow walkway that circled the top of the lighthouse. Below, I could see the phantom ships beginning to disperse, retreating from the light of the flames. The figures in the water were sinking back beneath the surface, their moans of hunger turning to wails of defeat. The fire had taken hold completely now. The upper portion of the lighthouse was fully engulfed, and I knew it wouldn't be long before the lower levels followed. The structure, weakened by age and the supernatural forces that had inhabited it, was already beginning to crumble. I had a choice to make. I could try to climb down the exterior ladder to my boat, if it was still there, and escape. Or I could ensure that the lighthouse was completely destroyed, that the ancient hunger that dwelled here would never claim another victim. In the distance I saw lights, a Coast Guard vessel, probably responding to the fire. They were too far away to reach me in time, but they would find what remained. They would know what happened here. I took out the small notebook I had kept in my pocket and wrote one final entry. May 15. The lighthouse doesn't save ships. It never did. It calls them to their doom, feeding something ancient and hungry in these waters. I'm ending it the only way I can. If you're reading this, do not rebuild. Let this place remain empty, the rocks unmarked. Better for ships to find their own way than to be led astray by false lights. I weighted the notebook with a piece of broken stone and placed it inside a maintenance box on the gallery, where it might survive the fire. Then I looked out at the sea, at the retreating phantom ships and the approaching Coast Guard vessel. The gallery beneath my feet began to give way as the fire weakened its supports. I had only moments left. In that final instant, I felt a strange peace. The lighthouse at Blackrock had claimed its last keeper. The false light would shine no more. As the structure collapsed around me, I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. They never rebuilt Blackrock Lighthouse. The official report cited structural failure due to fire, but rumors persisted among local sailors about phantom ships seen near the rocks on dark nights. Some even claimed to hear a bell ringing at precisely 2:13 a.m. when passing the site. But without the lighthouse to guide them in, no ships have been lost on those rocks since that night. Sometimes, in the darkness, hunger goes unfed.